All right, I have a couple of questions. We're going to start with Jim. And the question is, I'm going to combine two of them into one, Jim. And with the current conservation efforts that you talked about today, is there anything specific that you can recommend right now? And then the second question would be, what is the major concern for conservation efforts in the future?
Well, I think the most severe concern about conservation is not whether we have enough science. We have enough science to save wildlife, to continue to grow our country and grow our world in some kind of harmony with science. The question is whether we have the political will to do it. It will be more expensive. It will be more impactful of individual landowners and individual communities. We could do long-term land use planning and water planning in concert with the needs of wildlife if we had the political will to do it. Right now in Congress there's a great debate about whether we can afford even the investment in conservation that we currently have, which is 1.2% of the federal budget. There's plenty of people who want to get rid of it altogether in the name of deficit reduction. And not only that, but they want to attach a bunch of anti-environment policy to it and get rid of that while we're at it. There's a lot of wildlife advocates in this country who will not stand for it, and it will not stand. And we're going to fight like hell. Now, the question is, if you want to fight like hell about it, I would recommend you do one thing first, and that is go to the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership website, which is trcp.org, and look at the statement of 1,300 progressive organizations in this country that they sent to Congress saying, do not do this. Do not do this because it screws up $1 trillion worth of economic value in this country from conservation, outdoor recreation, and historic preservation. Do not do this because it's 9.4 million jobs that can't be outsourced to China or Mexico. It's really important for our economy. Do not do this because outdoor recreation is growing 3 times as fast as the general economy. Do not do this because it's the match to $1 billion that sportsmen put on the table for conservation every year. Do not do this. And that's why House Resolution 1 didn't become the budget of this country, because the Senate said no. If you want to back that message up and want a lot more details, go to trcp.org, Google up America's Voice for Conservation, Outdoor Recreation, and Historic Preservation, and add your voice to that message. We're in a democracy. Every one of these guys is counting votes. If you respond to them with the same energy you respond on these individual eagles here, we can still make a difference, and we can send us down the right crossroads in terms of future priorities instead of going down the wrong crossroads. trcp.org, America's Voice for Conservation, Outdoor Recreation, and Historic Preservation.
Thank you, Jim. We'll make sure that we get those website addresses up on our website for you. All right. The next question is directed to Ed, and this is a really difficult question, Ed.
Aren't they all?
This is a tough one.
What's new?
Yeah.
Here it is. When can we start contributing to the bear enclosure at WCV?
Last week. No, the question actually relates to a specific sequence of events that's underway right now for a variety of reasons. Wildlife manager in the department head in the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries made a decision, a difficult decision, but an expedient decision, that newborn bear cubs or bear cubs up to 6 months of age that were orphaned or otherwise came into the possession of the agency would be euthanized just as a matter of due course, because they did not feel that it was worth the investment of time and energy needed to find or develop appropriate facilities in which to raise those animals. And we really weren't talking about a huge number of animals, maybe a half a dozen a year. And the department, unfortunately, took the view that we've got lots of bears, what do a half a dozen matter? Well, they now have a somewhat different view after the media found out that they, in the last 2 weeks, euthanized 2 absolutely adorable, totally healthy little bear cubs because of not choosing to deal with it. Well, the public responded vigorously, what was it you said, Jim, with enthusiasm and passion and torches and pitchforks. And indeed, the department is revisiting that policy, and it now appears that in the next couple of weeks we may be working with them to revitalize and kind of resurrect a plan we presented to them about 2 years ago to develop an appropriate state-of-the-art black bear raising or rearing facility at the Wildlife Center on National Forest land. Essentially, it's just a great big fenced-in area, but the fences are double for security and also blinded, or covered with material so that the bears can't see out, so that they have the opportunity to grow up in a protected area, but grow up as bears. So the individual who made this decision made the decision that it was cheaper to euthanize the bear than to work with us on developing the facility, but he failed to take into account the public's love of wildlife. I don't think he's going to make that mistake again anytime in the near future, because they're in pretty much bunker down mode over there because of all the criticism they've gotten. So within the next few weeks, we hope to announce a specific plan to develop a facility along with some specific price tags on it, and hopefully we'll be able to raise a core of seed money that will then be matched with some of those federal dollars of which Jim just spoke, and it could well be that we end up with a facility that will be well over $250,000 in expense, but with any kind of luck at all, we won't need to raise but about 25% of that. So stay tuned.
I just want to add a little bit to that, a broad context. The reason why fish and wildlife managers make these kind of decisions is because they're in the bunker. And the reason they're in the bunker is because most fish and wildlife agencies in this country are slowly strangling, because they're trying to do priority wildlife work on the basis of hunters and anglers' fees, which are shrinking. So the public's expectation for habitat management, for protection of endangered species, for outdoor recreation, for giving good advice on where we should develop and where we should not develop, like Reese was talking about, is going through the roof, but the fee structure is dropping through the floor. And every fish and wildlife professional in this country is just deer in the headlights scared that we're going to lose the entire conservation framework. And so they're making decisions with this mindset that we just can't afford that stuff. We can't afford to do that stuff anymore. And it leads to this kind of public outrage, and it leads to very, very difficult controversy. But it's rarely contexted in the reality that these agencies are desperate to be able to do their basic core policy work. And they'll look at 3 bear cubs or 2 bear cubs or an eagle, an individual eagle, in the context of very, very healthy populations, and they'll say, this isn't a conservation priority. And then the public says, oh yes it is. And the reality is, if we don't deal with the fundamental conservation framework and the fundamental baseline funding, we're going to continue to have these kind of flare-up, blow-ups, because mostly the public doesn't understand the stress that these guys are under.
Yeah, and I guess that is a segue to one final point, and the fact is that a lot of these professionals are so burdened down with just their day-to-day survival on behalf of wildlife as agencies, they're not making the connection that through a handful of bear cubs or through 3 eagle chicks in a nest in a public park, they can enlist and recruit and motivate and direct an entirely new constituency to broaden the base. Exactly. Conservation in this country for the last 75 years has been mainly the hook and bullet crowd. Hunters and anglers, buying equipment, donating dollars, restoring wildlife, but that has changed. It's now bird watchers and photographers and people who enjoy wildlife in a non-consumptive way at the same time as those who continue traditional outdoor sports. And it's taking a while for the institutions to catch up in their mindset to realize that even though a lot of their funding comes from hunting and fishing dollars, you are their constituents because they are responsible for the wildlife about which you care.
Thank you. My next question I'm going to direct to Reese. However, if either one of you would like to jump in too, we'd like to hear from you. This question is twofold. If we know of eagles in our neighborhood or in our hometown, one, what could we do or should we do? And how do we know if they're being watched by biologists?
Depends on where you are. If you're in Virginia, particularly eastern Virginia, then the Center for Conservation Biology, the organization that I do my research through, we're the ones that monitor all the bald eagle nests that are in the eastern portion of Virginia. So that would be any place along the major watersheds, the Potomac, the James, the York, the Rappahannock, and here in the Hampton Roads region. If it's in the western part of Virginia, then it would be the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. They're the ones that are monitoring the population that are springing up in Shenandoah Valley and in some of the more northern parts of Virginia. If it's in another state, the most likely organization that's going to know about that is going to be your wildlife agency, or perhaps your local Audubon society would have a handle and might be involved in the monitoring or the protection of that particular nest. One of the things that we're a bit careful about, a nest, for example, like here at the Botanical Garden, that's on public property, that people have regular access to, is one that we can publicize and one that we can call attention to. Oftentimes, if it's on private property, the private property owner respects its privacy, doesn't want to have 200 or 300 people with their cameras and so forth coming out to observe their eagles. So we don't do as much publication about that, but we still try to monitor that so we know exactly what the population level is.
And Jim?